Hello and welcome to the Posture Dojo podcast. My name is Sam Miller. We're here on a journey of posture transformation, sharing stories from my own healing journey of an 85-degree kyphoscoliosis over many years from an adolescent to an adult, and speaking with experts from various fields, bringing different practices together to understand our own body and our body's innate ability to heal and transform as we give it gentle advice and nudging along the way. Benjamyn, the movement monk, welcome to the podcast. Why do you call yourself the movement monk?
It's a good question. Thank you for having me. It kind of happened by accident a little bit. It was a weird turn of events. I've always loved to sing and recorded an album when I was like 18. And my singing teacher, about 10 years later, turned into, or maybe not 10 years later, but a period of time later, reached out and contacted me. He was creating a martial arts magazine called The Complete Martial Artist. And he'd seen some of the things that I was doing online and contacted me to write some articles for the magazine. And at the time, he was then asking, he's like, well, what do we call the section of the magazine, and what do we call you? And I'm like, my name's fine. But then through some back and forth, we got into a conversation. He's like, well, you're philosophical and you like movement. You're like a movement monk. And then it kind of stuck from there. And here we are today.
I was drawn to the work you're doing online because you're talking about somatic movement, nervous system regulation, and unbinding the fascia. Walk us through. I'd say let's introduce people. Like, what do these things mean? How do you define these three things: somatic movement, nervous system regulation, and unbinding the fascia?
Okay. Well, to put things simply, somatic movement, really is the intersection between awareness, attention, and movement. And that's at least my simple way of looking at it. And so when we're looking at things somatically, it's really to observe the body, to connect with the body. And it's a bit different to, say, normal exercise, where we might be working with the body for some form of output, like you do sets and reps to get stronger or fitter or faster and that sort of thing. We can do that with somatic movement, but the intent is different, to get to know ourselves through the experience of the body and to utilize that as a reflection tool. In a way, that's how I like to look at it. And then along the way, we'll get to know the nervous system, which is a big part of our body and essentially has impact on all of the involuntary and voluntary functions of our body and sends impulses through the body all the time. And so I came into working with the nervous system realizing that our body isn't just the sum of our movement and our muscles, but also the sum of our thoughts and emotions, and all of these things affect our physiology. And the nervous system is a really tangible way of paying attention to the effects of the things that are happening in our world and how we're interacting with our world, sort of like an antenna in a way. And a lot of people are in a state of chronic dysregulation, meaning the nervous system is stuck in, what you would call, say, a fight, flight, freeze, or even please state. And we can talk more about that, of course. And then we get to the fascia, like the web that binds everything, that interconnects it, which is a really fascinating area of practice and exploration, given that if we didn't have that, we wouldn't have any structure to us. We would just sort of be like a floppy substance on the ground. And the wonderful thing about working with the fascia is we start to get to see the interconnections between the whole body. And I find this really useful to work with because, I've been through a lot of physical postural challenges myself and worked with so many people who have been through similar but different experiences. And, we could be experiencing, that shoulder issue that's been hanging around for a long time and think that the issue is the shoulder. But when we look at it from a fascial perspective, then we start to see, kind of like my top, it's creating tensions that are affecting the whole body. So if there is something, maybe there's something happening at the hip or the foot, and it's causing a ripple effect of tension. So I might feel it at the shoulder, but it may not be the root cause of what's going on. And so if we look at those three things, they can give us some really wonderful tools to start to go beyond just cause and effect based exercise rehabilitation of like, I do this exercise and then that's supposed to lead to this benefit. And then the challenge with that is that we don't actually know. No one knows what's good for anyone's body because it's not their body. And that's why I like to bring people in closer connection to their own body so that it can be a collaborative process to work with it.
Amazing. So we've set a really interesting stage for this conversation. When I was originally diagnosed with kyphoscoliosis at 16, I tried a lot of alternative stuff, and I guess it wasn't structured effectively enough with the right program, because it's really dabbling here and there, and like real postural transformation, you do need to bring that consistency. So it was just kind of floundering a little bit. Ended up in an orthopedic surgeon's office at 18, and it was really I was there to decide or investigate or to determine whether surgery is an option. At the end of it, I wasn't a candidate for surgery. The pain wasn't debilitating enough. I still had function. It was really going to be an aesthetic correction and have quite a bit of consequences and quite a risky surgery for purely aesthetic. And so after that meeting, I was just kind of like, well, that was the end of the line. Like, okay, it can't be fixed. And the system, the traditional conventional medical system, I guess, is geared towards solutions that it can see. It needs that physical, tangible kind of results that they're looking for. And I think the big problem that I'm overcoming in terms of like helping people transform posture is like the awareness that you do have all of these things that you can tap into, these skills and these tools that you've just walked us through that are extremely beneficial. Like no one can really deny it. Once you've really given these things the time to learn and integrate and practice, like it can't be denied these things are extremely beneficial to understand. But when I was 18 and I wasn't a candidate for surgery, you're just kind of like, well, that's it. You got to live with it. Good luck. Off you go. And that set me off on a very different path that I wish I had these things that we're about to dive into, as we kind of talk through them, because as I've started, it took me until I was 33, just kind of living with it, ignoring it, just kind of getting by with it, where my, the imbalances higher up had really cemented in place, especially because I'd been going to the gym and doing bar squats and locking in all of these tensions. My entire system started getting choked out from the inside. My psoas muscles, my hip flexors, my midsection had choked up so tightly that my system completely started shutting down. And that's when I started taking it seriously about 5 years ago. So to unfold, to unwind, the three things that you really specialize in are what I've been tapping into, and I'd love to kind of go into those deeply, because someone who is transforming their posture can benefit by understanding these things. And the somatic for me is that body awareness, that realization that, okay, we're carrying our body differently. We have tensions, in our lower back instead of our glutes. We're activating our muscles differently. We're firing differently. The nervous system is, I'd say more closer to the root of your posture than the spine is. A lot of the attention's, it's my spine. What exercise can I do to fix my spine? Well, why is your spine in that position? What messages are coming from your brain through your spinal cord that goes in the middle of your spine and then telling your muscles to tighten, relax, to just regulate or just have a normal, default posture? What are those messages? What's happening there? Where, I had years of a chronic tension in the hips from an injury in the groin and hips. So I had that tension there while my spinal column was growing, warping the spine as I grew and had this growth spurt, right? So the nervous system is, at the core, at the root of so much of this posture. And then the fascia. Now, having lived with this imbalanced, incorrect kind of weighting in my system, the fascia, that web that you're talking about, it's like it's clumping in certain areas, right? Where it needs to overwork and underwork. It's kind of like clumping and clustering. And if you're going to go on the journey of transforming your posture, trying to just do it from that musculoskeletal perspective without realizing that you've got this web that's really going to hold you in place until you release that, you're kind of, you're swimming upstream. You're working inside of a restricted kind of bag kind of thing and trying to punch your way out without addressing, where your system is clumping and tensing. So this is a really, really valuable set of tools that you're teaching there. How do you go about, bringing people through this process?
Yeah, thanks, man. And I can relate a lot to the journey that you've shared, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, and if you'd like to share your own postural journey as well, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'll intersperse it with as we talk, and which sort of like how I sort of got into teaching all of this was through personal experience. Like before, there was a time when my body worked just fine. And I didn't need to know anything. It was like at the time, when I was going through a lot of postural challenges, scoliosis was part of that, and then acute injuries turned into chronic pain, sports, it all kind of accumulated in my system. Like I played volleyball for Australia as a junior, and so like putting demands upon my body and just kind of expecting that it would work and not thinking otherwise. But then when it consistently didn't, I had to start to reimagine what was going on. And so at the time, like the field of somatics wasn't really, I didn't even know what the word somatic meant at the time. Like this was close to 15 years ago now. And I happened upon it by accident. A friend of mine, I was talking about some of the things that I was facing, and they gifted me a session for the Alexander technique, which is a somatic modality, quite simple and passive in its nature. It's facilitated you're on a massage table, you're just laying down with your head slightly elevated, and the practitioner is just bringing attention to different areas of your body. At the time, my mind's going, what's the point of this? Like I just want to get back into the gym and lift heavy stuff again, because like that's what I like to do. It made me feel strong.
It's more tangible. You can see it. You're like, what is this subtle stuff? I'm not, I need the big force maneuvers.
Totally, yeah. And like it was clear metrics, and like I had my eyes set on the prize of like, I'm going to deadlift this weight I'm here and that means I'm getting stronger, and there is a sense of achievement and validation through that. And so it was difficult to let go of that and to move into this field. It did take me some time, but I couldn't deny what started to happen in this session. And my body started to convulse quite randomly. Not that was a sign of success, but I'd never experienced anything like that. That my body was going through this rapid process of change. And it made me, I remember looking at the roof, looking at the dots on the roof, and it started I was kind of hallucinating. It was a very transcendental experience. There was no drugs involved or anything like that. It was enough of an experience to start to open up my questioning faculties as to what is happening here. And so it led me on a path. And so while the experiences when I work with people don't necessarily have to be like that, it does start in a process of awareness, of coming back to the body. And so the simple way that I like to look at it is we create different scenarios where we get to look at the body as a reflection of ourselves. And one of the simplest ways that I start to do that is to connect with stillness and movement, particularly slowing the processes of the movement down, where we can then start to, I created a program called the Physical Freedom Challenge, which is like a 14-day process that takes someone through all of this work in a really efficient way. And my mum's actually going through it at the moment, which is a really wonderful thing, when your family, there's something about that for me. And she was talking to me about one of the practices that she was going through. She's like, I was noticing this and I was noticing that, and I remembered this injury that I had on my foot, and I hadn't thought about that in so long. And then she asked, am I doing it right? And I was like, well, while there is no right, because that's an area where we can get really stuck of doing an exercise in the right way, I then just reflected back to her that look at how much you have noticed just by paying attention to your body without trying to force it to be something, to see what's there first, and what has come up just in 10 minutes. How can you then work with that information, that hasn't been addressed for many, many years? And that's really, really insightful. And so I look for that start point to open up that process of questioning and inquiring, and then we can continue to move and expand from there.
I go by a definition of pain, not mine, but the definition is pay attention, integrate now. PAIN. Pay attention, integrate now, right? Pay attention to what is before, as you're saying, trying to do something new. Pay attention to what's there. What is your body calling for? What is in that place? And so how does somebody, obviously lying down, meditation, is there ways in particular that you like, let's say a practical tip for someone who says, okay, I want to do some introspection. What would you suggest?
Yeah. And it's an interesting, and my perspective on this has evolved over the years as I've kind of gone from my own experiences to then working with thousands of people. It starts to inform and give you different ways of looking at it. And initially, I wanted to share the things that really were impactful for me, and the things that felt simple for me, I realized were actually quite advanced. As an example, one of the areas of practice and study that I went down was exploring Chinese martial arts, and with that came the healing side of those practices of Taoist forms of practices and Shaolin forms of practices. And a cornerstone of that was a stillness practice called standing meditation, which is kind of what it sounds like. Of you're in a standing posture, you're moving into a meditative state, and you're there for a period of time. And with that, it seems really simple, but meditation is not the easiest process for someone to get started with, because everything comes to the surface, and standing still also quite challenging for a lot of people. So while that seemed really simple for me to start, I realized that there are better ways for us to develop a connection to the body, because what I realized for a lot of people, when you look at the nervous system, that if we are in a state of where we have experienced things within the body, there may have been traumas that we've held all the way from childhood, like body memories of things that have happened. There may have been injuries, all the while we've gone through this life, we're experiencing the body, and a lot of the time when things are happening chronically or even acutely, even connecting with the body can be a scary experience. Feeling the experience of the body can be so much to take in, because when we focus on the body, everything elevates, with that principle of what we focus on grows. And so I realized this phenomena of, here's a simple practice, like just standing and observing and noticing. Initially, this can start to create an aversion to even connecting with the body. So we needed to find gentle ways to reintroduce someone, and it's different for everyone, of course. And I'm talking about in the cases where there has been quite a big disconnect from the experience of the body. And so looking for gradual ways to reintegrate back into the felt experience of the body. And so the way I like to look at it is going through this process of, how did we develop when we were babies? Before we could even move, before we had motor function. And so I've been quite interested in this, observing these developmental processes that happen. And so like, you imagine that you're a baby in a crib, and first you're looking around, and then we start to gain our function of the head and the neck, but we can't really do much, and like the hands and the feet start to come online, and then we can roll from side to side. All of these are huge milestones in our physical development that we have forgotten or take for granted. And then that ability to roll over, and you're on your hands and your knees and you can crawl around. There's such a wonderful developmental stage there, and if we don't rush that, then eventually the awareness of the body starts to, our spatial orientation is there, and then, we're upright. Fall down, we get back up hundreds of times until eventually we stabilize, we're on our feet, and then we're walking. And so if we can look at that, there's such a rich tapestry that is there, that often when we're adults and when things are problematic with the body, to think about rolling on the ground, to think about going below the height of a chair, seems like this very strange concept. But therein lies such a rich field of exploration to reconnect with that childlike quality, and that developmental process can really be a key to unlock so much for so many people's bodies.
Perfect. Amazing. So spend some time, take a chunk of time, get on the floor, find a rug, something comfortable, right? So we're not going straight to the hard floor, but some type of, the bed is probably a little bit too soft, right? Some type of mat, and be a baby. Drop the ego. Drop the ego. Return to those something wriggling. Try to wriggle around on your back, but as you're kind of bringing your awareness to different kind of functions, go back to that place, wriggle around, as you were saying, rolling. I love that as a very informative process. There's something I wanted to kind of go from that, which is that where would you? Okay, let's go from there. I think if I remember, I'll come back to it. But let's move on to the nervous system and the fascia then. So, and these are all great introductory kind of like let's become masters of this field. We have these postural challenges. Let's learn. Okay, let's go back to those basics. Let's let go. We have to kind of revisit the scene of that trauma sometimes, right? Or at least in the methods that I've been developing, it's going to that place, right? So we're going into that collapse. We're going into that, even that position in that baby position. I remember what I'm saying now. I recently went to it was kind of like a somatic therapy. We were getting into the hips, and I had a very strong resistance to a particular range of motion, and the word trust came to me. It was a Spanish practitioner, so it was confío, right? I trust, which it just came to me, and it was just when I repeated it, I started feeling that release happening, and so I kind of repeated that confío, I trust. And whether it was for the external, whether it was for me, it was just a very healthy kind of thought to bring into my mind as we were going to that restriction that I had in that hip. So is that part of your somatic process? What do you do when you come across kind of these? How do you venture into trauma? In the body, in the somatic method?
Well, when we're working with it, the way I like to look at it is trauma is a condition of separation. If we look at ourselves, our experience, we've all got different parts. And some of the parts of us we feel afraid of, or we don't like, or we feel ashamed of. Why is that? Where does that come from? It starts to then get into a question of how do we learn? How do we grow? What was the context for life that we were placed upon? And so with things like traumas, we tend to face really kind of three key things of, it can come in the form of a sensation in the body. It can come in the form of an emotion. It can come in the form of a thought. And this can make it a bit elusive sometimes, because each of these then inform the other. And depending on where our development of our own mind and awareness is, this can be challenging for some people, because that triggered trauma can then lead to all of these other associations that have happened through the life, like experiences. And so the first kind of stage is establishing really a base of safety in your own experience in the body. It's kind of like, if you think about it, something that is, I was working with a lady who had a car accident, and that was a traumatic experience. She was one moment she was fine being in a car. The next moment she's experienced whiplash and a very acute traumatic experience, and she's gone through this like very quickly, but that memory is in her body. So then every time she thinks about going in a car, or every time she thought about going in a car, that memory loads up. So all the emotion, the shock, all of those feelings, all of the thoughts about it, her body starts to tense up and remember it. So that's like in the case of a physical trauma. So, you know, when I was speaking with her, so this lends to some of the ways that we can work with it. There is a cognitive process of like actually talking about, expressing the things that have happened, you know, like giving that a space. And because sometimes we don't even know, you know, like the thing happens, we move on, and then it just stays there. So giving that a space to be expressed, but then starting to create new associations. You know, the one thing that we spoke about in this case was, I asked her, I said, statistically, is it more or less likely that you would have an accident now that you've had one? And she thought about it for a moment. Anyway, we came to the conclusion that the probability of being in a car accident is still the same, whether you've had one or not. But her system is heightened. The levels of protection inside are already anticipating there is a higher probability of that happening. So when we come back to that initial thing about trauma, is there is a part of her that is separated from the whole, creating this alternate experience that keeps playing on a loop. Car equals pain, you know? So, but there is other parts that actually know that's not the case, right? So the process of working with trauma is a reintegration process where these parts can come back together and start to go, oh, okay, this is not absolute. I can start to be safe in this experience again. And so when working with traumas, we may not even intend to go straight at the trauma to begin. We may start to, you know, it could be, let's say we do identify that there has been a traumatic body memory that comes up. And I really love that you shared about that process of trust, because it is a big part, because we're going into essentially the unknown. And that is scary, you know, for anyone. Like, and so it's an unraveling process from there. Yeah.
So that, you know, that experience, whether, you know, it's that car accident, whiplash, in my case was an unfortunate passing of events that had my ankle in a river and my other leg was kind of being swept downstream and causing quite a bit of trauma to the groin, hip area. You know, the experience itself is one thing, right? That has that snapshot. That was a very unique, unfortunate scenario. We were kind of, you know, what do you call it? Just kind of rafting in the waves a little bit. It's you know, unlikely that I have, you know, that trigger trauma of that situation again. But you know, so we have this really strong mental state that gets imprinted, and then you associate it with a car or something you come across, and boom, you have, you know, your brain is like, it was such a strong imprint that you're just neurally very connected to that state potentially, and then you just switch to that entire thing, and what you're explaining seems to be integrating that and retraining, creating these new neural connections that establish car is safe instead, right? And I'd like to kind of add on that a little bit in terms of, because one area that I haven't heard as much about when it comes to trauma is like the rehabilitation of that trauma can actually be the trauma that we're healing. And that was actually the case in my scenario, and especially with the hips, because the actual injury itself healed, but you know, having weeks and months of that tightness in my hips and that area, it caused issues. It became very chronically tense. And so the healing is going into that area and saying, when you're in that position, it's okay. You're not going to, collapse the body. We're not going into that area of pain. And I believe that's why saying trust, having the trust that I can move through that range of motion and not be in severe pain or doing damage was kind of what allowed me to free up that. So it's not only the experience, it's also like what patterns you might have embedded in during the healing process. If you've sprained your ankle and you're holding your body to walk with a limp for many months, that can also embed more kind of compensations in, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I experienced that firsthand. I've got a scar on my foot where I cut it down to the bone, and so couldn't walk on that foot for quite a while, a few months all told. So I then learned how to compensate during that time. Went from the period of walking on crutches, body's adapting to that, and then trusting in that I could even bear weight in the other side again. Took me a while to be able to do that, and then had to build the physical capacity of the area, because it had, like what we don't use, we essentially lose function of. And so then there is a physical process, and so along the way
lose function and that neural connection, that neural pathway to just activate that area.
Yeah, and so as going through these things, there is a huge physical process that's taking place, and bringing experience together with that, because it is when you go from the contrast of you're used to the body working in a particular way, and then it doesn't, and then you learn other ways on how to work around it, and then unwinding that process, it's sometimes easier to just sort of find the path of least resistance until that can then lead into other things. So we're going back into like facing these obstructions, these areas of challenge, with a level of trust and self-respect as well, because the way we approach it, the body will reflect back. It's like the same as the way you would treat a friend. If you were aggressive to your friend, well, you can see what that relationship is going to be like over time. If you keep forcing your friend to want to do things that it's not ready to do, you can see that will be reflected back. And so you can have, this is really interesting, but you could have 10 people doing the same exercise with 10 vastly different effects.
Yeah, so I'm hearing your some of your martial arts perspective come through in how you approach it, which is awesome, because resistance creates resistance, right? And I feel like that very physical exercise, going to the gym, trying to to really physically transform your posture, is kind of it can, like, you can make progress, and I don't want to say you can't, because there's things that you can do that way, but without understanding how the nervous system is interconnected, how the fascia is, you're really you're working against the grain. You're swimming upstream. So these next two, nervous system regulation and myofascial releasing, which one first, or do you try to do them both at the same time? How do you bring these concepts into someone's toolbox?
Yeah. Well, it is all interconnected, and it does get into a case of which came first, the chicken or the egg. I don't know the answer to that, but like if we are working with someone from a fascial perspective, of course there will be the nervous system, and vice versa. But for a lot of people, I would look probably at the nervous system generally first, we may do it in different ways that may involve the fascia system, but one of the first intentions is that if systemically, because we've got to look at when anything's out of balance with the body, there's local things that are happening. It might be the shoulder, the back, or an area of the back, the hip, the ankle, the neck. There's a local experience, and then there's a systemic experience. And so the whole system, if that system is a high pressure environment, if there's a lot of stress that has built up, and over a long period of time, the immune system is depleted, all of the vital functions of the body have, lost their kind of level of optimization or function. We need to start to give a better environment so the body can adapt and grow. And so looking at things that may seem like they're not fully related in the beginning to start to increase the vitality of the system. That may be as simple as bringing the focus on just moving the body in general ways and breathing, because breathing is like one of the best ways to access the nervous system. A useful way to think of it is what would happen if you didn't breathe? What would happen to your nervous system? Very quickly, we will have a physical experience. And this is why I like to work with things, because a lot of the time, sometimes it can be an obstruction of we don't do things unless we have all of the scientific research to back it up and to validate and give ourselves permission to do something. But we can learn so much about our bodies just by paying attention. And so looking at it almost as like your own scientific experiment with yourself. And so we can start at simple things like that to start to increase the level of vitality in the system, start to down-regulate the nervous system to get back to a base level of, okay, I can start to relax into different experiences. And then we can start to kind of work more and more physical processes and apply that to more physical situations.
The breath is a great way to down-regulate or up-regulate the nervous system, right? It's kind of our gas pedal to how hard we want to floor our magnetic machine going on. So are there practices that you use each day, and how do you like wake up and just crank it? Do you go down first and then up? Like how do you manage your breath gas pedal and therefore your nervous system throughout the day? Because sometimes we want to relax, but sometimes we want to go into that game mode, whether we're going into a high focus negotiation or meeting or sports. We how do we start to learn our gas pedal?
That's a good way of putting it. Well, if we look at, for me personally, it's early in the morning here. I first wake up and just notice my breathing. It's kind of like, without first trying to change that process, looking at my breath, noticing, okay, where am I at after that sleep? Then, I had a cold shower. I didn't really want to. It was uncomfortable. I kind of wanted to get out, but then come back to, okay, this experience is a lot. It's early in the morning. I don't want to do this, but coming back to the breath, okay. Now I'm redirecting my attention. I'm noticing what's going on in my body. All of a sudden, that cold water becomes less intense. I'm coming back to like a really core part of me, my physiology. So these are sort of more passive ways of working with the breath, of just Like I don't need to do Wim Hof to have a cold shower, as an example. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it doesn't have to always be this very forceful process that can sometimes happen. However, though, it can be really, really useful as well. Like you were saying, there may be times when your energy slumps, or when you would like to upregulate your system, where using more directed breathing processes can be really, really helpful, and that can be like the simplest way of looking at it is we really have 4 phases of our breath. The inhale, there's a possibility for a retention at the top, the exhale, and then there's a possibility for retention at the bottom. So we can manipulate those variables for different physiological effects of the length of our inhale, the length of a retention, the length of the exhale, and the length of the retention. And you can see popular practices like box breathing fitting into that really nicely. And so this is a simple way that we can look at it. And what I like to do is, rather than force people into protocols, is to give guideposts and then start to go, okay, what might happen if you started to breathe in this way? And then we can gather our own information and kind of develop our own personal toolbox, rather than going, this breathing practice is the way, because as soon as you do it once or twice or 3 times, your physiology already starts to digest it, and the effect of it changes over time. So we need to be able to be adaptive to a changing system. And so this is how I like to look at breathing and breath work. Yeah.
And also compliant, right? Because we do need to, this is about making long-term changes, and you're not going to find a huge amount of correction by doing, a practice once or twice. Let's say you'll find much more value if you stick with something over the long term. And so, I can see you've, in your journey helping people, you've come across that, a very large challenge, which I have as well, which is compliance, getting people to do these things. And in a recent chat, a chiropractor mentioned it's far easier to get someone to remember something than to do something. And I think you kind of said the same thing before a protocol. You're guiding them to reflect and become aware, and to constantly go on that path of I guess more of a reflectively healthy relationship with their breath, and you're constantly just in this awareness of what your breath is. And starting your day with that, I think, is amazing. It's something I've also noticed I've been doing. If I wake up and my mouth is dry, I know I've been breathing through my mouth all night, and I haven't, it's time to get out some of the mouth tape again and start retraining to go through the nose, which for me is a path of more resistance, right? And in the kyphoscoliosis correction, we really are going to a breath of more resistance. When we have let's say a scoliosis curve, we have a flaring of the rib cage on one side, and without intention, without awareness, our breath will go into that area and potentially exaggerate that curve. And even if you get surgery and correct it, there are studies showing that people are still progressing in their curves because they're not learning this awareness and these types of breath, and this understanding that, okay, let's be aware of where we ideally want to breathe, that corrective breath, and do the work that it takes. Remember to breathe in that way, which does bring more alignment and correction as we're going. So the waking up and giving it what it needs is, that reflective relationship, I feel, is much more valuable and much more likely that someone can start seeing value to this in their lives than trying to say, okay, every morning when you wake up, do 10, 20 minutes of breath work to bring you to this state, and then this type of breath to do it. Like, we're looking for success. Like, remember the awareness, remember that relationship. Something I've been doing recently, the last couple of weeks, is walking barefoot on a nice kind of dirt road that I've got in the jungle there. Before picking up the phone, before plugging in to the digital, really going barefoot. And the first, I've gone through phases in my life where I'm hanging out outdoors more, and sometimes where I have a lot of shoes, and you get quite soft. Your shoe, it's really a beautiful kind of reflection to kind of feel your feet get a bit tougher. I'm enjoying it right now because similar to the cold shower movement. It seems that a great strategy is really like being able to have a more, I guess, down-regulated nervous system in these higher pressure, potentially higher, stress. But that the first strategy for stress is not perceiving things as stressful in the first place, which is why I'm reluctant to call it stressful environments.
Yes.
But let's say a high pressure environment where you need to perform, and whether you're going into the ring and fighting, or whether you're going into a grocery store and trying to work through the lines and the people and whatever it is, your ability to bring your body into a state of relaxation, no matter if you're in a cold shower or you're walking on a very sharp rocks and gravel, your ability to breathe and calm that system, I think, is one of the most valuable, I'd say, perspectives or awareness that you could have with what you're trying to do with your breath, or what you are doing with your breath, I should say. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah, it does. It's I can relate in that I like to walk around barefoot as much as possible, and one of the questions that gets asked so much is like, doesn't that hurt you? And I remember initially when starting that process of reintegrating my feet with the ground.
Mm-hmm. And that step where you're, imagine that first step and it's like that clenching and that cringe, like that tensioning that happens.
Yes. Yeah. It was painful, and because my feet were used to work sitting in this comfortable, cushioned, hug-like environment of a shoe. And then all of a sudden, they're stuff sticking into them, and so that was actually one of the first gateways of going, okay, here I am in this experience. I can meet this experience and relax into this experience rather than avoid it, And a lot of the things that I'm interested in for myself and for other people is to move on a pathway to freedom, and that journey is continually about, it's not about trying to find the easy way always, but it's about establishing ease in these challenges, where I do believe that every person has a gift, has a purpose, whether they have to clearly define it or not, but there is a path that we're all moving on in different ways, and that path is not going to be comfortable. And so what do we do in these cases when the body's giving us discomfort, when there may be things that are obstructing us or feel challenging in moving forward in that path? What is the difference between the person that meets that, tenses up and closes up and avoids that comfort just to try and alleviate it, to live in restriction, or how do we meet that restriction? And we have this wonderful thing that's there all the time that we can work with, being our breath. And that's one of the ways that I like to look at it. We have so many important energetic channels that go from our feet all the way through our bodies. Our internal organs are all connected to the feet. There's reflexology that has done this. Chinese medicine has been on this for a long time. And so when you walk barefoot, you're sending electric signals through the body. And if you are resisting and it's pain, and that's
that would be the less ideal way to do it. And the reason that I've been enjoying this practice is because it is through the breath that you are able to allow. And that's where when I'm like, I'm feeling that intensity, I'm just like you go to the gym and you're putting your muscles to work. I feel like this is like taking your nervous system to the gym a little bit and breathing through it and allowing. These are all skills that are incredibly useful for increasing your threshold, right? To be able to deal with anything after that. Like the rest of my day is chill. After I've done like just a 10-minute walk on some seriously uncomfortable rocks and I've just breathed through it, I feel great the rest of the day. Like things come at me and I'm just like, this is chill. Yeah. And just as a disclaimer, like if you haven't done this before, start easy, start slow. Don't go too sharp too soon, because this can be quite nerve-wracking, literally, for your nervous system. You can feel quite shot if you do it too much, too intensely, too quickly. So just like in the gym, work your way up, progressive, overload a little bit. But it's certainly something where it's choosing that path, that freedom of movement. I like that. And freedom of movement no matter what the terrain is, right?
Yeah.
All-terrain capability.
Yeah. It's kind of the difference between a Formula One, as a side note, they did I think it was maybe Top Gear or one of those car shows where they were asking the question, who's the better driver? Here you've got top level Formula One driver and a top level rally driver, and both excellent drivers in their own regard. But if we fast forward, the better driver was the rally driver, and they tested this by putting the rally driver in the Formula One car and the Formula One driver in the rally car. The rally driver was better because they were used to this unpredictable terrain. They're always having to adapt and adjust, whereas the Formula One driver was really good in these controlled circumstances. And of course, there's exceptions. I used to love watching Michael Schumacher drive because of his ability. There was a race when he was driving in Monaco and it was raining the whole time. And, when it was dry, there was not much between the pack. But as soon as it was wet, his ability just shone. It was in these circumstances that were less predictable, that were outside of the norm, that then essentially his connection with, I don't know what it was like for him, but my hypothesis, his connection with the moment, with the car, with how to navigate those circumstances in that different terrain, far excelled everyone else. And so that ability to adapt to an ever-changing environment is such a useful quality that I find that we can all work with.
Yeah, and I feel that we can work with it by choosing and creating a lifestyle that reflects that all-terrain capability. Because if we're in a very sedentary, waking up, sitting in breakfast, car to the work or car to wherever we're going, sitting wherever we're going, office, Zoom, very sedentary. We're not really moving our bodies. We're crunching our hips. Then we go to the gym and we're like, I'm going to correct my posture. I'm going to do my, 30 minutes, hour posture correction thing. And then you go back and you're just completely, static and rudimentary. The way, we pick that, like the rally driver, right? We pick that unpredictable environment. We go for walks in nature, which has rocks and logs to step over and different things that challenge us. We move our work environment. We sit down on the floor. We kneel. We squat for a little bit. We use our phone while we're in a deep squat or something. We start finding activities, hobbies that do put us in that environment that require our bodies to reflect that capability and expose any weaknesses or any restrictions that might be getting in the way of it, right? Because when we're going to dodge the dodgeball, because we started playing dodgeball because we want that full body movement, we're like, wait, why couldn't I pull that move off? Why am I getting weakness when I'm trying to do the gymnastic rings, right? We start learning, we give our body so many more opportunities to learn how to evolve, to become aware of these things that are getting in the way, and then using these tools that you've graciously shared on this podcast to heal and grow.
Well said.
So, we've hit an hour. I think we're at a great place to kind of wrap up. I'd like you to share, like, how, in what state are people who come to you? How do you work with them, whether it's online or in person, and where can they find you?
Yeah. Well, easiest way to find me is through my website, movementmonk.xyz. You'll also find me on YouTube, on Instagram. They're kind of the main places that I would hang out. And yeah, I work with, really the simplest way that I would put is sensitive souls. And I don't mean that in a negative way, because I would see myself as one, like people who feel a lot. And that's actually an inherent gift. They notice what's going on in the world, but maybe that hasn't been supported. For me, that was challenging, being a man and feeling a lot of things. It didn't really fit, but it has been the biggest strength that I've realized about myself, of being able to connect with other people and like pay attention to experiences and then be able to know who I am in that process. And so I have noticed that the people that I work with tend to have that inherent knowing of that sensitivity. There is a connectedness or a feeling of connectedness, but they may be feeling disconnected from themselves, from the world, all of that sort of thing. And as a result, a lot of their body may be reflecting that, of chronic conditions, whether that be things that are happening at the level of the nervous system. They may be chronically dysregulated. Their bodies may be, in a state of tension. They may have had injuries. Commonly have tried to do a lot of things, that are maybe a little compartmentalized in their approach, not to make any of them wrong, but like trying to, get that adjustment, and then their back just goes straight back into the same position a couple of weeks later, or get that massage and then, they build up the tension again, or try that stretch, or they haven't quite found ways on how to, like you were talking about before, like have consistency in a practice that is caring for their own body. These are the types of people that I work with, and you can find everything through Movement Monk. I recommend the first step as before even exploring further. I do work with people one-to-one and in small groups as well, but I created that process called the Physical Freedom Challenge as a really accessible way to get started with this, because at the end of the day, feeling is understanding, and we've talked about some really interesting and useful things. And what I would recommend for people to go from here is to come back home, start to establish a connection with your body and understand all the things that we've been talking about from an embodied perspective. There is so much you will understand, about your body somatically through just becoming aware and moving. You'll understand about your nervous system by paying attention to things like your breathing. You'll understand your fascia by starting to move into areas and feeling where your body might be bound up, whether that's externally or internally around your organs and all sorts of different things. And so starting that process of questioning and noticing and paying attention and remembering, like you said before, I think is a wonderful place to start. And they're the people that I like to work with in that process who are ready to remember.
Beautiful. Yeah, to remember that original state, that to remember where we came from, to remember our highest function, our innate function. It's beautiful work you're doing. I know that you are on an amazing path. You're bringing together ideas and methods and practices that are extremely useful and not often as promoted by conventional systems. So I want to thank you for the work that you do and the people that you're helping. Sensitive people, empathetic people are even more reflective, and it seems like you're guiding them to go under the hood, to unravel whatever layers may have been on top, and restore some pretty optimal health. So thank you very much for sharing what you do. I know it's going to help a lot of people if they remember and then integrate those new memories into their body with new neural pathways. So thank you for sharing, Benjamyn. We'll see everyone on the next podcast.
Thanks for having me.